Why the avoidant finally breaks and starts missing you badly. Let's talk about something that feels like a paradox. How someone who pulled away, ghosted you, or kept you at arm's length suddenly starts to miss you like crazy. You've probably been there. Things were going great. There was connection, chemistry, shared laughs, maybe even glimpses of vulnerability, and then they pulled away. The texts slowed, the calls stopped. You were left wondering, what did I do wrong? But here's what you didn't see coming. At some point, sometimes weeks, sometimes months later, they come back. A text, a call, a like on your story, and suddenly they miss you badly. Why? Not because you begged, chased, or tried to prove your worth, but because you stopped. Because you finally pulled your energy away and turned it inward into yourself. Avoidant people don't process their emotions in real time. They run from connection when it gets intense because closeness can feel threatening. But the truth is, they feel it all, just with a delay. When you step away, you're no longer feeding the connection. And in that silence, their feelings catch up to them. Suddenly, your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. They start to remember the way you made them feel, not just how you looked, but how you listened, how you laughed, how you got them in a way that no one else did. And that hits differently when you're gone. But here's the part that matters most. The real shift doesn't happen when they miss you. The power is when you're no longer waiting to be missed. Because now, you're not hoping for breadcrumbs. You're building a life that's full, with or without them. And if they come back, they're not returning to the same version of you. They're meeting someone stronger, wiser, scarier. Not because you're mean, but because you no longer need them to choose you in order to choose yourself. When we think of someone who's emotionally avoidant, it's easy to mislabel them as cold, indifferent, or even incapable of deep connection. But that's rarely the full picture. In reality, most avoidants do feel deeply, they just don't process those feelings in real time. Their instinct is to create space when emotions get too intense. Not because they don't care, but because the closeness stirs up something unfamiliar and often uncomfortable. Connection feels threatening, not because it's bad, but because it requires vulnerability. And that's where avoidants tend to struggle most. When you're with someone who's avoidant, everything can seem wonderful at first. They're charming, present, and even emotionally engaging. But the moment real intimacy begins to develop, when consistency, expectations, or emotional availability become necessary, their internal alarm bells start ringing. They pull back, they take space. Sometimes they disappear altogether, and you're left confused, trying to make sense of how someone could go from warm to distant so quickly. But here's what most people don't understand. Avoidants are often emotionally delayed. That means they don't feel the full impact of their emotions until long after the triggering event has passed. So while you're grieving the sudden loss of connection and trying to make sense of what went wrong, they're busy running from their own emotional response, from yours, and from the risk of vulnerability. In their mind, pulling away is a way to protect themselves. It's a survival strategy rooted in early attachment patterns that told them closeness equals danger or suffocation. But time has a way of catching up to even the most emotionally distant people. And that's where the shift begins, when you finally step back, when you stop texting, stop calling, stop offering your energy on a silver platter. Something unexpected starts happening inside them. The space they initially craved becomes unsettling. The quiet becomes loud. The lack of your presence forces them to sit with the emotional residue they thought they could avoid. And slowly, sometimes without even realizing it, they start to feel the weight of your absence. not just intellectually, but emotionally. Avoidants don't usually miss you the moment you walk away. They miss you when they realize they can't replicate the connection they had with you. When the silence becomes a mirror, when the space they created becomes a void, and when they finally feel safe enough or lonely enough to face what they were running from, that's when the emotions come rushing in. Regret, nostalgia, longing, the ache of losing something real. But the most important thing to remember is this: their emotional delay is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their own emotional blueprint. You didn't imagine the connection. You didn't do anything wrong. They just weren't equipped to process it at the speed or depth you are offering. And ironically, it's only in your absence that they begin to realize just how much it mattered. There's something incredibly powerful that happens when you stop trying, when you stop reaching out, stop checking their social media, stop leaving the door open just in case they decide to walk back through it. For someone who's emotionally avoidant, this shift doesn't go unnoticed. In fact, it often hits them harder than anything else ever could. Avoidants are drawn to control. That doesn't always mean they're manipulative or cruel. It means they feel safest when they're the ones deciding how close or how distant the connection should be. They get to regulate the temperature of the relationship, and that gives them a sense of emotional safety. When you continue reaching out, waiting, hoping, even in subtle ways, you're unknowingly reinforcing that dynamic. You're signaling that they still have emotional access to you on their terms. But when you stop, truly stop, it disrupts their sense of control. The silence, the stillness, the lack of your energy suddenly becomes undeniable. And that's when something unexpected begins to happen inside them. Their emotional defenses, which were built to keep vulnerability at bay, start to feel less like a fortress and more like a prison. The comfort of distance turns into discomfort. The quiet becomes anxiety. And in that gap, your absence speaks louder than your presence ever could. What triggers this shift isn't your words or your efforts to prove your worth. It's the energy they were once so used to receiving, suddenly gone. No check-in, texts, no replies to their breadcrumbs, no emotional lifeline. The part of them that was once content to stay disconnected now feels that disconnection. And because avoidants aren't used to sitting with uncomfortable feelings, especially ones related to loss or longing, the emotional impact hits with a kind of delayed force. It's important to understand that this isn't about playing games or using silence as manipulation. It's about reclaiming your power by choosing not to keep investing in someone who isn't meeting you where you are. It's about recognizing that your worth isn't determined by whether someone chooses to show up. And ironically, the moment you stop waiting for them to return is often the exact moment they start feeling the weight of what they lost. The withdrawal of your presence forces them to confront the emotional truth they were trying to avoid. Not through conflict or conversation, but through contrast. The contrast of life with your warmth, your support, your understanding, and life without it. And that contrast creates a kind of emotional clarity they couldn't access when you were still in the picture, still available, still hoping. In stepping away, you give them the only thing powerful enough to shake their emotional numbness: space. Not just physical distance, but energetic detachment. And in that space, they begin to feel, not just think, not just rationalize, but feel, really feel what your absence means. And that's when missing you becomes inevitable. When someone avoids emotional closeness, it's easy to assume they don't care or that the connection never meant much to them. But that's rarely true. What often gets missed is how deeply they register emotional experiences, just not in the moment. When the dust settles and there's enough distance for them to feel safe again, that's when they start to revisit what they had. And it's not just the physical attraction or the fun memories they miss, it's the emotional safety you offered that begins to haunt them. Avoidants struggle with closeness because it feels risky. Risky to their independence, risky to their sense of control, risky because closeness means being seen. And being seen can feel terrifying when your self-worth is fragile or you've never learned to express emotions openly. But even though they pull away, it doesn't mean they're blind to what was special. In fact, once they have space, they start to feel the absence of something they didn't know they needed until it was gone. What they remember isn't just the good times. It's the way they felt with you. It's how they could show up messy, confused, or inconsistent, and you still saw them. It's how your presence never demanded perfection, but invited honesty. They remember the way you looked at them when they let their guard down, even for a moment. They remember how easy it was to talk to you, how you understood things about them they barely understood about themselves. That kind of emotional presence is rare, and once they realize it's no longer there, it begins to ache in ways they didn't expect. You see, emotional safety doesn't shout. It doesn't force itself into someone's awareness. It's quiet, subtle, like a warm room you didn't realize was comforting until you step outside into the cold. And for someone who is avoidant, they often only recognize the warmth once they feel the absence of it. Your patience, your consistency, your willingness to understand instead of judge. All of that created a space where they felt more like themselves, even if they couldn't fully name it at the time. So when you're gone, it's not just about losing a partner or a romantic connection. They're losing access to that safe space you held for them. And no matter how emotionally distant someone may be, that loss is felt deeply once it finally registers. The world outside your presence feels harsher, less forgiving. Other connections might feel more transactional, more surface level. They find themselves comparing, even if they don't admit it. And often they start to realize, maybe for the first time, that what they had with you was not just rare, but grounding in a way that's incredibly hard to replace. In missing you, what they're really missing is how they felt in your presence. Seen, accepted, and safe. Possibly for the first time in a very long time. And that's not something people let go of easily, no matter how avoidant they may be. There's a quiet turning point that happens in the aftermath of being hurt by someone who couldn't meet you emotionally. At first, you're left hoping they'll come back, hoping they'll see what they lost, hoping you'll get some form of closure or recognition that the connection meant something. That hope keeps you tethered, not just to them, but to a version of yourself that's still waiting to be chosen. But healing begins the moment you stop needing to be missed in order to feel whole. It sounds simple, but it's not easy. There's something deeply validating about being missed by the person who pulled away. We crave that signal that we mattered, that we weren't crazy, that what we felt was real. We want them to circle back and say, I see it now. I see you now. And when that doesn't happen on our timeline, or at all, it can feel like we're stuck in limbo, half moving on while still emotionally holding out for resolution. But here's the truth. Waiting to be missed is another form of giving your power away. It keeps your sense of value tied to someone else's ability to recognize it. And the more time you spend hoping to be remembered, the more you're forgetting yourself. You end up stuck in an emotional waiting room, measuring your worth through the lens of someone who couldn't meet you at your depth in the first place. The real shift, the one that truly changes everything, happens when your focus turns inward. When you stop asking, do they miss me yet? And start asking, what do I need to feel alive again? It's in those quiet choices to go for a walk instead of checking their profile, to write your thoughts in a journal instead of sending another unsent message, that you begin to reclaim your power. And something beautiful happens when you no longer wait to be missed. You start remembering who you were before the pain. You reconnect with parts of yourself that got buried beneath the overthinking and the emotional chasing. You start creating joy on your own terms. You laugh again, not because they texted you, but because you found something or someone that lit you up. You begin building a life that is full, rich, and emotionally secure, with or without them. Ironically, that's when you become most magnetic, because your energy is no longer wrapped up in trying to prove something to someone who couldn't see you the first time. You're not playing hard to get. You're genuinely hard to reach because you're busy living. That's when people feel the shift. That's when they start to notice the silence isn't desperate, it's dignified. And if they do come back, they come back to someone who no longer needs their attention to feel valuable. And that kind of transformation, that's what real healing looks like. Not being missed, but no longer waiting to be. When someone who once pulled away tries to come back, they often assume they're returning to the same version of you they left behind. The one who waited, who hoped, who still had open arms. But what they don't realize is that time, distance, and pain change people. If you've been doing the inner work, healing, growing, rebuilding your sense of self, then they're not coming back to the same person. They're coming back to someone stronger, more grounded, and no longer willing to accept the bare minimum. This shift is subtle at first. You may still feel the emotional echo of what you shared with them. You may even feel tempted to respond when they reappear, especially if they come with apologies or promises. But something inside you feels different. You've spent time without their validation. You've had to face the loneliness, the questions, the self-doubt. And instead of crumbling, you rebuilt brick by brick. You created a stronger foundation. One that isn't based on being chosen, but on choosing yourself. And that's what changes everything. Avoidant individuals often return when they believe the door is still open. They remember the emotional safety, the depth, the way you made them feel, and they want that comfort again. But what they don't expect is that the person on the other side of the door has changed. You're no longer in the same emotional space. You're not starving for their attention anymore. You've learned how to meet your own needs, how to regulate your emotions without relying on their presence. So when they come back, they feel it. That subtle shift in your energy. You're calm, but not desperate. Warm, but not wide open. There's a quiet strength in your boundaries now, and it makes them realize that getting close to you again will take more than charm or timing. It will take accountability. It will take emotional maturity. It will take effort, consistent, real effort to be let back in. This isn't about revenge or playing hard to get. It's about evolution. You've evolved, and your standards have evolved with you. You no longer make room for people who can't hold space for your heart. You no longer bend to make someone else comfortable while you stay emotionally underfed. You don't tolerate inconsistency disguised as emotional complexity. You want real. You want available. You want someone who chooses you fully, not just when they feel safe or when it's convenient, but every day. So if they come back, they'll find the door isn't locked, but it's not wide open either. It takes more now to get through. Not because you're bitter, but because you've learned. You know what your love is worth. And if they want access again, they'll have to meet the version of you that no longer needs them, but is still open to being met. Truly, deeply, and equally, thank you.